Thanks for stopping by Big Top Gaming. My name's Brian, and in this video we're returning to another top 5 for A Song of Ice and Fire. This time we're going to be looking at cavalry units. Now, I do want to try and get some more list discussion videos out there, but I've been watching a few too many Korean dramas, and it's taken time away from me being able to get practice games in with those. I want to start talking about some Targaryen stuff, and I also need to touch on Alistair Thorne, but for right now this is where I'm going, and I promise not to make a habit out of these, but unless the comment section sways me otherwise, not like these will be the only thing I do, but right now it just is a pretty good one to hit. In terms of looking at the units and how I organize them, I need to say again that I'm only looking at the units themselves. I'm trying not to incorporate all these outside factors of tactics cards and attachments and other things and commanders. Like, there's just too much that you can put on there to even try and start ranking these things. So I really am just looking at the raw stats and maybe touching a little bit on what the faction can do with them, but for the most part that's it, just the unit and nothing else to try and change these rankings up. In the number 5 spot, we've got the Dothraki Screamers. Now, there's not much to talk about with these, considering they have no real abilities. They are extremely fast. Speed 6 is great on Cavalry with that free maneuver at the beginning of their activation. They're hitting on 3s, which is also great. These guys want to be charging all the time, so it means that they're going to get most of, if not all of their hits every time they're pulling off a charge. And their decay stat for their attack is not that bad. Going from 7 to 5 is not a big deal. The 5-up save isn't super awesome. They're not going to survive any real long engagements outside of the fact that they just have their 12 wounds. But the 6+ morale means that these guys should be able to take a hit and stick around for a little while, and it doesn't take you a whole lot of effort to get them back up to the full rank. That second rank, I guess, to get those 7 attacks again. The real attraction for these is that they're 6 points, and when you're playing against a Targaryen player who brings anywhere from 3 to 5 of these, really, it can get really difficult to figure out how you're going to position around the table, since they can just come at you from so many angles, and they're usually going to be able to get the alpha off on any turn they want to try and get it, really. So the Dothraki Screamers hit up a good solid 5th position on my list, and I think they're a difficult unit to negotiate when you're playing against them. In the number 4 spot, we have the Stark Outriders. Now, this isn't a unit that I typically see on the table. They got some play in the early parts of the game, then kind of went out of vogue, and then got some changes to try and get them on the table again. They come in at 7 points, so it's not a terrible point level. Their attack stat, just like the Screamers, is amazing. They hit on a 3, then it's an 8/6 decay, so it's really not that bad. They have a better stat line than the Screamers do with the 4+ save and 6+ morale, but they've got 2 really amazing abilities that keep them alive and keep them very dangerous. Being speed 6 is really helpful for getting the bushwhack ability to go off, and it only happens when they charge, so they're getting weakened, so the retaliation is not going to be so bad, and they become panicked. So since you're getting them on the flank, you're going to be swinging at -1, so you're likely to do some damage there. These guys just have an honest attack stat with no bells or whistles and are just there to do some raw damage from the side. The order Swift Retreat ends up keeping them around quite a bit, and there's really no way for your opponent to kind of position themselves after you retreat away to make it so you don't end up getting their flank again and getting bushwhack going, or they just go after another unit instead because they've kind of done a lot of work and made it so that the unit they originally went into isn't that big of a deal anymore. Especially with the way that you can go as wide as you can with Stark lists, these guys can end up wrapping around the back, and then your opponent's got to choose whether they want to deal with these outriders that have just retreated away behind their lines, or they've got to deal with whatever is in front of them, which is also going to probably get some bonuses if they don't position properly. In the number 3 spot, I've got the Ranger Trackers for Night's Watch. This is another fast unit. It's not really meant to be making charges, but it's not terrible with the damage output that they've got. They're really meant to kind of be shooting a bunch. But since the Night's Watch army is so attrition-based, having the order mark target is really what puts these guys into this place for me. They're a fairly inexpensive unit. They come in at 6 points just like the Dothraki Screamers do, and they have the same stat line as they do in terms of their defense save and morale, so they're not really easy to take down. With having the speed 6 and a short-range attack, they're going to be able to get into places where your opponent isn't going to appreciate those attacks, and they do throw quite a bit of dice that hit pretty accurately for a ranged attack. Throwing 7 dice that hit on 3s is really good, and since Mark Target can influence the output of any unit, it really is one of those things that helps push the Night's Watch damage over the top. There are plenty of commanders that can take advantage of this unit, and there are plenty of units that enjoy being able to push extra damage with vulnerable. If you're thinking about something like Sworn Swords, who are getting Sundering and Critical Blow to increase their output, then you've got this vulnerable token on top of it that your opponent really doesn't have a whole lot of say in whether it happens or not. I think it puts the Ranger Trackers in this really great position of being able to contribute to the game while supporting as well without giving up a lot of points to do it. In the number 2 spot, I've got the Knights of Casterly Rock, and I do feel that these are the premier Lannister combat unit. Their speed 5 is not so bad when you've got the cavalry rule attached to you. Their attack stat is deceptive when you're just looking at the line for Lance. It's 6-3 that hits on 3s, so you don't realize right away why they're so good until you end up looking at the rest of their rules. But their defensive stats are pretty decent. They've got that defense save of 3+ and the morale of 6+, which I feel like is just the point where morale starts to get good, and that's a little bit on the rare side in Lannister when you're looking at the not so faithful part of it. So coming back to the Lance rule and that attack stat, this is probably what I would consider to be one of the best rules in the game. It allows the unit to roll 3 extra dice when it's charging. It gets Critical Blow and Sundering. This does a ton of work when you're coming in, especially with you being cavalry. You have the ability to maneuver to the flanks of your opponent, and then getting that like essentially double Sundering bonus does a lot of work. And since you don't want to be stuck in combat, having the rule Lannister Supremacy is also really great on these guys. If you end up getting into a unit that hasn't activated yet, and crash into the side or even in the front, whatever, and you end up leaving just a few units or a few models in that unit, few wounds, if you will, in that unit, it means that your opponent has to make the decision of, do I want to spend the activation to attack and then just watch these guys pass their morale and then have my unit fail their panic test and just get wiped out, allowing these knights to kind of maneuver around and do what they want to? Or do I just leave them there and then eventually end up losing the unit to the Crown Zone or some other shenanigans that the Lannister player might have, and then I just lose out on that activation? So I think the Knights of Casterly Rock end up holding a really good spot in the Lannister army as being one of their better output units. In the top spot, we have the House Tully Cavaliers. Now, it looks a little weird that 2 top 5 lists in a row have had House Stark units in that top spot, but when we talk about what, or at least my bias towards thinking how good Lance is as a rule, this unit is basically just Knights of Casterly Rock tilted in a different direction. The Knights of Casterly Rock with Lannister Supremacy are more tilted towards that offensive side, while the House Tully Cavaliers have more of a defensive nature to them, even though they're just brutal in combat. They have a 3+ save, and they go to a 5+ morale, which puts them one over the Knights of Casterly Rock. They go from 6-3 to 6-4, so they have a little bit more sustain, even if it's not a ton. Same speed, they hit just as hard with the 3+. They've got the Lance rule, and the big difference for them is Embolden. These guys are basically like a little weirwood that kind of runs around the table and keeps your other units sticking around on the table longer, and I feel like that is value enough to put them over the Knights of Casterly Rock. But if we start thinking about the things that the Stark army does, not just within their tactics cards, but even just the units that they end up bringing, these guys can end up leading the charge and waiting for the other units to come in to clear them off. They shouldn't have any issues getting in there due to the speed and explosive nature of the Stark lists. So these units, really for the same reasons the Knights of Casterly Rock were where they were, are still justified in this unit. It's just they have a few things that end up tilting them to a little bit more of a productive angle, where the Knights of Casterly Rock, not only do they have to take the hit, but they also have to pass the morale, and then your opponent has to fail it, even though it's at a -2. But this unit just seems to do what it wants to in an active role instead of a reactive role. For the honorable mention category, I did want to put the Bloody Mummer Zorse Riders into this one. Not only do they have one of the coolest models in the game with the heavy-set Zorse Rider, but they do have quite a few rules that make them interesting for the same reasons that the Stark Outriders are interesting. The Disruption Tactics kind of does a similar thing. Instead of panic and messing with the way your opponent does things, they shut off orders and tactics cards with units they're engaged in. One of the reasons why this didn't get on the top 5 list is because this doesn't stop reactive things from charges, which is probably more likely the order or tactics card you're going to see pulled. Motley Armaments is the other part that's kind of baked into the Stark Outriders, but when you look at their stats, their defense save and their morale are not exactly where I would like them to be for a 7-point unit, and their decay is rancid. They hit really well on 3s, and speed 6 is super nice, but going from 7 to 3 is just really harsh. And outside of running a fluffy mummer focused list, I don't really see myself ever grabbing a 7-point neutral unit for when I'm grabbing a 7-point neutral unit. I'm not really looking for something like the Zorse Riders. They have the like distraction tactics going on, but when I'm looking for something at that price point, I really want it to do a lot of work, and these guys are hit or miss for me, but they still are an interesting unit, and I just haven't seen them enough to really feel like this unit is going to be putting up high results for me. Ended up making a better than people think category, and I do believe that belongs to the Flayed Men. They still have a really aggressive stat line, hitting on 3s and having that 8-6 attack profile just like the Stark Outriders do. Their defensive stats are still pretty good, saving on 3s and having a 6+ morale, but I think that there just has been a really difficult recovery in the sordid history that these guys have had in terms of how they've been changed or nerfed or kind of tried to be buffed. So the Flayed Men originally were just the terror of the Iron Kingdoms, right? They were just 2+ save. Even though they were 10 points, they were running around in pairs, sometimes even in quadruples, and it was just a really annoying and frustrating unit to deal with. I think that they are no longer annoying, but they just kind of are tilted more to this Bolton side of things that's more panic-based. So when whatever they charge becomes panic, like that's just gonna happen. And right now, panic tokens are pretty good. So getting those chances for extra wounds is quite helpful. The bummer about them is they only get vicious when they charge, and that's kind of it when you get to their special abilities. Coming in at a 9-point unit, I just don't know if they quite feel like they're worth the 9 points anymore. I think that 9 points number is probably more there to de-incentivize other armies from taking them, but it kind of hurts the neutral players. I've always kind of had this thought that most neutral units should be 1 point less when played in a neutral faction. I think at 8 points, this unit would see a lot more play. But right now, I think with all the changes, people just don't see them as anywhere near as good as they used to be. but I do think they add a lot of opportunity to a Bolton list. Or if you happen to be playing a panic style list, you kind of have to treat them like Knights of Casterly Rock, that first they don't have lands, but then if they're stuck in combat, they don't have problems with having a really good attack stat here. So I encourage people to try and play these a bit more. I'm not saying this unit is phenomenal, like it didn't make my top 5, but I will say that it is not trash. We've got the return of the too rich for my blood category, and that's going to the Dothraki veterans. They come in at that really elite 10 price point, and they don't have the greatest stats to back it up. I think 4+, like a 10-point unit that has a 4+ save is where it really hurts me. The 5+ morale is really great, and they do have a ton of attacks and a ton of rules, but for their stat line, I would expect the decay to not be so bad on their close combat. I don't know. This unit is just so strange. I think it's because it has more to do with the Targaryen lists end up running out of points really quick, and mostly because they don't have good 5-point units that aren't just Stormcrows, and the Dothraki veterans end up being the first ones that I end up cutting and moving to a different unit. Now, for a list like Khal Drogo, this is a phenomenal unit because he's all about trying to be the awesome rock star of the army, and the veterans really let him shine like that, and they keep him around for a while, but 4+ save is always pretty vulnerable when your commander's in it, and especially given how fast and how deep you're going to be into your opponent's deployment zone with this unit. I don't know, it's just strange. Like, I need to get more games with Targaryens, but every time I look at building an army with them, this unit goes in and then almost comes out right towards the end when I realize that I cannot make the list work with enough activations or enough NCUs to make it feel like these guys are really doing the work that they need to. 10 points is quite a bit. I mean, you're 2 points off of splitting the activation into 2 and getting 2 units of Screamers. So if these guys went down to 9 or 8 points, I'd probably feel a lot better about them, like a ton better at 8 points, but decent enough at 9. 10 just feels like it's a little bit too high for this unit, even though I'm not arguing that they do a ton of work for 10 points. It just doesn't feel right to me. So the category for Best Future Unit Rules Unseen is definitely going to be going to the Free Folk Giant Riding Mammoths. Now, I believe there was a discussion in one of the CMON Expo talks where they were saying that a mammoth of some variety was going to be coming out sometime down the line. I'm still crossing my fingers for giant riding mammoths. No, sorry, mammoth riding giants. Yeah, one way or the other. There is a giant on top of a mammoth, and that's the way that works. Although I think it would still be pretty cool if a mammoth were riding on top of a giant. I think it'd be just as fine. But this is the unit that I'm looking forward to seeing the most in terms of cavalry, and whatever its rules are going to be, it's going to be awesome, although I imagine it's going to be like a 10-point unit. I do think the Champions of the Stag are worth mentioning in this category as well. We get the super scary 2+ unit with a 5+ morale, and these guys are basically better wardens running around. They're twice the price, but at a 2+ save, 5+ morale. If these are around Renly at all, they're going up to 4+. They're going to be a hard nut to crack if these rules stay the way they are. They've got that 3+, 8/6 attack profile, and that puts them on the same level as Flademan in terms of output. But then when we look at the rest of their rules, they get critical blow, not just when they charge, but just always have it. And they still have that same rule that Wardens do, where if you fail your defense save on a 1, you become weakened. They don't get to use those as vulnerable tokens, which is, you know, a bummer. But if we look at what it was replaced by, it's parry. And with a weakened token, every time they roll that 1, they're taking a wound. So no matter what, you're going to get punished for attacking this unit. They've got that 2+ save that you're not liable to crack in one go, even if you're looking at Sundering. Even when you've got them on the side with Sundering, they're still saving on a 4+, which is not that big of a deal for them. then you also have parry on top of that. So if they end up zapping you to get this weakened token out, you're going to be taking wounds for just swinging on them. They're just going to be a really difficult unit, and I think that it's going to be one that people might complain about once they start coming around, but they do come in at that 10-point price level, and that's going to be a little tough for Baratheons. If you made it through to the end, thanks for watching the whole way through. I do appreciate it. And if you have any comments about my top 5 cavalry list, feel free to leave them below. I don't think that this is the end-all be-all for top 5 in the game period. It's just my opinion, and I completely recognize anyone else's dissenting opinion towards it, or if you've got a different organization for what you think the top cavalry should be. I do know that I put a lot of effort, or not a lot of effort, but a lot of influence into the lance rule, because I do think it's such a good rule to have, and cavalry just use it so efficiently, but I can definitely see how someone would take a different perspective on those. Otherwise, thanks for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.